Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Viking Warrior, and welcome to, hopefully, the first episode of How to Mod. As you can see, Daedalus is firing the How to Mod beam. Here's the folder that I'm going to be using, and here's some of my programs that I use for my modding purposes. As you can see, we have Notepad++, which is just a basic coder. As you can see, I've also got some of my some of the things that I've been editing on here. Now, Sins of a Solar Empire dev, I advise, if you're doing a lot of editing, just putting a shortcut to it on your on your desktop, because otherwise you've got to come into the, in my case, Steam library every time to come all the way down to here to find the dev exe. Whereas if you're doing lots of changes in a short period of time, it's just so much easier to have that there. And Audacity for sound, the thing that comes out of your mouth when you speak, unless you're on mute. Didn't think of that one. So the first thing I'm going to show you and go over, this is the basics. So I'm going to basically go over the base standard template for an entity file in Sins. So for this purpose, we're going to use the most famous ship from the Stargate universe, the BC-304, because for those of you who don't know, I am a coder and the community manager of the SGI Stargate Invasion mod for Sins of a Solar Empire. So what we're looking at here is a basic layout. This is the base template layout for all of your ship entity files. So let's start from the top. So text, that's quite obvious, that's text, it's saying it's in text format. Entity type. Now there are multiple entity types, from bases to even planets, star bases, etc. So the BC-304 is a heavy cruiser, so it's designated as a frigate, meaning it's constructed from the frigate shipyard. Default auto attack range is set to gravity well. That means anything, it automatically will be set to attack anything that enters the gravity well that it's in. And then obviously just below that we have default auto attack on true. So from the moment it's constructed, default auto attack will be on. Prefers to focus fire, true. That means basically it prefers to fire all of its guns at one target rather than multiple. I mean, it can, if we find it down here later on in this file, it can fire at multiple targets at once. It doesn't have to fire at a singular target, but it prefers to. Uses fighter attack. False. Now, this is very rarely used in Sins modding, as far as I can tell. From all the mods that I've played and seen, fighter attack is very rarely used, as it's more of a primarily carrier ability. So basically it's for ships with a huge fighter complement and point defenses, so a carrier class. However, most ships don't specifically use fighters to attack. They will use their point defenses or even their guns. So moving on, auto join fleet default true. That basically means if you jump into a gravity well, up here, gravity well, that has already got a fleet that you have created in it, then on jumping into the gravity well, the BC-304 will join that fleet automatically. Meaning you don't have to keep clicking join every 5 seconds. Can bomb false. That's quite to self-explanatory. Can it bomb planets? No. Type count, now that's more of a squadron thing. So in this case, type count 1. You click it once, you build 1 BC-304. Frigate roll type. Now you have 2 for frigate rolls, I do believe. I could be wrong. I haven't looked at some of the other ones. But you have light and heavy. Heavy tends to be in the cruiser department, as you can see up here. And light is frigates. In terms of in-game building and where the icons sit. Stat count type is for frigate heavy. That is a base stat count, which you can then look for that stat count and edit it to how you want it to be. Moving on, the main view icon. So if you've got Sins up and you've got your HUD and your interface and that, there's a picture in the middle between your, normally between your like diplomacy alerts and military alerts, and between your construction and ship abilities. That is what is defined by this. This is a file in our mod that makes that main view icon in the middle there a human cruiser BC-304. Actually, what I'm going to do is... Okay, so now what I've done is I have gone in and got a picture off of the game to show this off. So the main view icon would be, assuming, well, the main view icon is this down here in the very middle of the screen at the bottom. As you can see, you've got your statistics of the ship itself, in this case the Daedalus or the BC-304, your alerts on the left hand side, and ship abilities and commands on the right. So that's what the main view icon dictates. It dictates this box here in the very middle. Can I make this apparently not. Oh god, what have I done? No, that's not working. Never mind. We will just reopen the file. Screenshot. What I will do is I will move it off screen for now. Onto my second screen. Next is the picture, the BC-304. Now, this one not so easy to show, as it's not this main icon here, nor is it the iconography up here in this corner here. It is actually the picture that appears on the construction when you click it. So that would require another screenshot. However, in this area, when you click on your planet, around here and here, where these two are, you tend to end up with frigates and cruisers. If you click on the cruiser one, and it opens up, you then have a list along here of all the ships. It's the picture that is signifying which one is the BC-304 from the iconography alone. So, name string ID. This is where we get confusing. The name string ID is what gives the ship its name in the files. Now, this is basic to add. You simply open name string ID, type in that, and if it's already in there, it'll find it, and then it's got a value below that which you can edit. I believe I have got a string file around here somewhere that I was working on. I'll just open the one from here, so I can display to you what a string file looks like. This is a string file. as you can see, it is a lot of lines of text. There are 6,972 strings in this string file alone. Now that covers both IDS name and IDS description. So let's find the BC304, shall we? So we just copy this, Control F, paste it in with Control V, find next, there we go, and there it is. And right here is where it is. And you can see the ID, string info, ID, IDS Human Cruiser Heavy BC304 name, which links up with the name string in its actual file. And then below, the value, the BC304. And then below that, you have the IDS Human Cruiser Heavy BC304 description, which, as you can see, just below that, in the string file, we have that one as well, the description. And the value, a heavily armoured warship equipped with punishing close-range weapons. And this appears in the game if you haven't got a string name given to it. Then when you hover over it, rather than giving it its name and description, it will come up with string not found. Now remember, when editing strings, you must always keep this number correct. If you don't, it will start to cut off ones from the bottom every time you add a new one. So say I added 4 more and didn't update the string number. These 4 would get cut off from the bottom, and it would come up in the developer file, in developer dev, with a little pop-up window in the top corner, top left-hand corner of the screen, saying string info missing, IDS random event resource boom name. And then you'd skip that and it would come up with open rebellion missing, and so on and so forth. And this can get very irritating if you are developing. So you've always got to be careful about making sure that this string number of strings, is precise. Because if you don't, it's going to irritate the hell out of you and you may end up losing some strings. So that's the strings covered. Obviously there's the counter description ID, which currently for ours I believe is the base counter description for all frigates. Yes, here it is. This is put in the base game, the counter descriptions for the basic roles. So as you can see here, you've got, this helps sum it up. You've got IDS counter description frigate anti-fighter, so you've got anti-fighter frigates, anti-module frigates, light frigates, long-range frigates, heavy frigates, and non-combat frigates. And then you move on to corvettes and fighters, etc., etc. Basically, putting this in means if your string is not detected, if this string was not detected, it would then replace the string description to this. It's just to cover yourself, but it can get a bit confusing if you obviously don't know what you're looking for. So you've always got to be careful. Now, moving on, base price. So this is just telling you the price of how much each one costs. You can obviously just change it. So if I do that, it now costs 50 credits to build. Let's put it back. And you can make things free to build. So you just get rid of all of those and make them all 0. So it is free to build. Slot count is how many fleet supply it takes up to actually construct a ship of this class. So in this case, 17 fleet supply is what's required to make the ship, and that then takes off of your fleet supply how many ships you can construct. Build time is quite obvious, that's 45 seconds there for build time. Has levels, false. Most cruisers, or most frigates, or things that come under the frigate range, do not have levels. The only things that tend to have levels is capital ships. Experience points for destroying, 10. Now, you might be wondering, experience points? Why on earth, for destroying the ship, 10 experience points? This line of code here is just explaining to you and explaining to the game that when this ship is destroyed by a capital ship, they gain 10 XP. Because obviously, frigates don't have levels, so XP for them is wasted. Moving on, max hull points, 1450. Now this is unupgraded 1450. So obviously, we would have another entity file, a research entity file, that would boost all frigates by 5% in hull. So that would then go bigger. We also have max shield points, same thing, an entity file for the research of shields to make this better. Hull point restore rate. Now this is 1.45 hull per second, which may not seem like a lot, but for a ship with, well, it's exactly 1% of the max hull points. So if you brought this down to 1 hull point, this restore rate would take 99 seconds to bring it back up to full health. Same with the shield restore rate. That would take 99 seconds to bring this back up to full shields. Now 99 seconds is, what, 1 minute 39. So it's not too long. Obviously you get Titans and things like this that have much more shields. They have more like that much shields. And as such, you simply just do that. So now this would take 99 seconds, assuming you want it to refresh the shields back to full. Now obviously you can play around with these for your own mods as much as you like. If you feel like the credits for a BC 304 should be 6,500, you can do that, and that will then translate over into the game. Now, moving on, we have base armor points. Now this gives it 5 pieces of armor, 5 points of armor. And basically that just adds to the defense of the vessel. It, as far as I can tell, it's similar to damage reduction in Fallout. This 5 is 5% of all incoming damage is reduced. Now that may not seem like a lot, but when you've got a ship doing 100 average damage to your ship and 5% of that is being taken off, then that ship's only doing 95% damage to you. Which is not a lot, but it adds up. Max mitigation. Now this is actually for shields. This is max though. Max mitigation, meaning you can set it to be either 100, so it can mitigate all damage and is basically invincible when fully upgraded, or if you want, you can set it to 20, so it can only max out at 20 mitigation. So it will stop and you can only max out 20% mitigation. Now obviously if you just leave it at 0, it doesn't worry about it, because you can't have a 0% mitigation. Sin's ships must always be able to mitigate something, and as they start with some form of mitigation, leaving it at 0 means that the max mitigation is completely ignored. Now prerequisites, that's quite clear. Prerequisites in this case sometimes it needs another ship to be built, like an F-302 in this example, or a fighter would require something with carrier capabilities, or a hangar defense station, or a space station before it could be built. In this case, it is just one research. The research prerequisite is the Human Research Cruiser Daedalus, which is an entity file. And that basically just makes the research in the research tree appear, and then that's got its own entity file explaining everything about it to the game, and that then basically says that once this research entity file has been achieved, this ship, the BC-304, this beautiful one here, is unlocked for construction. And it states that it only needs to be level 1 for this, as some things such as armor upgrades or hull upgrades have multiple tiers. So you could have level 1 that is 5%, or level 1 of level 1 that is 5%, and then level 2 of level 1 that takes it up to 10%, and then level 2 level 1 being 20%, or something such as this. So this is basically just stating it just needs Human Research Cruiser Daedalus to be active to level 1, and that's done. It can be created then. Now, required faction name ID, obviously you can set it to be very specified on faction, but for the most part you don't need to be, because you will probably have another file somewhere stating all the ships that that faction is able to construct. And required completed research subjects, 0. Meaning it doesn't need multiple different researches in order to build. For example, it doesn't need Human Cruiser Daedalus 1 to be done, and then it also needs 4 research stations to be constructed. Basically 0 means once you've done the upgrade, you've got it permanently. Number of random debris, large. Number of random debris, small. This basically means when the ship is destroyed, it drops 1 large random debris and 10 small debris. Unless of course you want to go in and create your own debris for the ship when it's destroyed. And number of specific debris, obviously. Armor type, very heavy. So, as we can see, 5 armor points for a Sins ship, a cruiser that you can unlock at level 1 with 1 military research station. A very heavy armor type is very impressive. And now, HUD icon. So the HUD icon, which as we can see is HUD icon human cruiser, that is another entity file in itself, or a texture file I believe. The HUD icon basically means this icon. So when you zoom out far enough to not see your emblem, you see instead that sort of icon, which we then have small HUD icon. So obviously zooming right out, you will get a very, very tiny version of it. And then info card icon, which is this one up here. This is your info card. No, it isn't. I tell a lie. This is the small HUD icon, and when you hover over the ship, a card pops up here which tells you all of the things, and this is the info card icon that appears up here. Minimum zoom distance multiplier. That basically means that when zooming into this ship, it will zoom in 1.5 times faster than normal. or that's the minimum it can zoom in per like scroll of the wheel, I believe. Number of weapons 3. So all ships have, we know them as hard points on their decks. This ship has loads of them, and without going into the mesh file I cannot show you them, but there are multiple on these fins here, there are multiple on the top here where the missile bays are, there's multiple on this plate bit on the top. There's weapons all over this ship. However, those hard points are dictated by the number of weapons that this ship has. Well, I say number of weapons. It's more types of weapons rather than actual weapons. And this has railguns, missiles, and from later upgrades, Asgard beam weapons. So let's start at the top. Weapon projectile. Okay, so this is the railgun. Attack type anti-heavy. Damage effects shields and hull. Damage apply type backloaded. Damage type physical, so not psionic or anything like that. Weapon class autocannon. Damage per bank. Now, ships and stations that have weapons have 4 different banks: front, back, left, right. As even though this is a 3D game, it tends to happen on a 2D plane. So this would be front, this would be back, left and right. There's no up or down. And so its front weapons do 40 damage, which obviously can be upgraded with another entity file going over upgrades and research for railguns. So its forward firing weapons will do 40 damage. Its rear firing weapons, because it tends to have only 2 railguns on the back that fire backwards, do 10 damage. Left and right, because it can fire some from the front and some from the rear, do 20 damage. Now, you might be wondering, well hang on, when I've played this mod, it doesn't come up with that. It just says average damage. That's because Sins takes all 4 of these totals, so 20, 20, that's 40, 40, 40, that's 80, 90. It takes 90. So this ship firing every single bank of its weapons at once on one target will do 90 damage. However, it doesn't say it will do 90 damage, because Sins takes that 90, divides it by 60, and then comes up with a DPS, or damage per second total, which it then averages per full sort of all guns firing from every bank, averages that, and then it tells you what the average damage is. So yes, okay, the front bank is doing 40 damage, so it does about 35 to 45 dependent on conditions and how many rounds actually hit, etc. And altogether the ship firing all its weapons does 90 damage. However, the info card will say it will do 10 damage, because Sins takes the pre-buff cooldown time, which is the delay between firing, the amount of total damage it does, which is 90, and the amount of projectiles is fired, which is 6 in this case. It takes all of those and figures out what the DPS from all of the guns firing at once would be for this ship. And it does this for all ships. So for example, the Azuran orbital beam defense platform does 400 average damage. It doesn't, if we take a look in the file. Game info. Orbital. Azuran orbital cannon. Orbital weapons platform. That's a planet module. Wrong one. Orbital shield generator, repair platform, mine, jumper blocker, cannon, orbital cannon. No, that's the AG3. That's human anyway. Orbital heavy defense. Is that what we've created for the beam platform? I believe it is. Now, orbital heavy defense. No, that's the drone platform. So it would be the cannon, which would be this one. Yes. Number of weapon, missile. Nope. Where on earth is it? Weapons platform. No. Oh, there's some more down here. Combat laboratory, jumper blocker. I genuinely don't know. Orbital beam and all subfolders and just advanced options, file contents. Okay, what I'm going to do instead is open this lovely little bit of tech that I have called Agent Ransack. Now, this is something that we use as, basically, I will quickly demonstrate. This now tells me all the files that have Starbase upgrade phase in them. So this is all of the upgrades for the phase Starbase, whether it says so on there or if it says it in the file. So, orbital beam. And that's not appeared there. However, if we do this, that is a planet module orbital beam weapon, which appears to be for the Psi. I don't know. It is called orbital, isn't it? Orbital. Ability, jumper blocker, research orbital, name, let's... I am genuinely unsure. Let's try this, because we have an interesting naming convention. Here we go. Azuran orbitals. Weapons platform, heavy defense, orbital cannon. This would probably be the Lagrangian satellite? Yes, this is the Lagrangian satellite. So that means weapons platform is no. So that means heavy defense. No, that's the... Okay, so it's weapons platform. We've figured it out. So, if we go down to weapons, here it is, beam. Now, according to the game, the orbital beam only does 400 DP average damage. However, it actually turns to face and does 2000 damage. But because it takes 2000, 5 seconds to fire, and it lasts for 4 seconds, Sins takes that, does all the calculations in the background, and how many beams it fires at once, does all the calculations in the background, and comes up with an average damage over per second of 400. Because it takes 4 seconds to fire, and it takes 5 seconds to cool down, and it fires 1 beam, it comes up saying, this beam platform does 400 average damage. It does 2000, but of course Sins works it out on an average basis. So that is how you can. That's why you get averages rather than you get, for example, these numbers. You get an average railgun damage in this case. So moving on, we've got the range of how far it can shoot, the pre-buff cooldown time, which is the time between each round firing, or each volley, as it were, in this case, because it fires 6. So that's 3 seconds between each hardpoint reload, basically. Can fire at fighters, that's quite clearly true, so it fires on fighters. Synchronized targeting, false. Now, we talked about that up here. Prefers to focus fire, true. However, synchronized targeting is false, meaning it can fire on multiple ships all at once without having to fire on one at a time. Because as we can see in, for example, Stargate Atlantis, where the Daedalus goes toe-to-toe with 2 Hive ships at the end of Season 2, it was firing on both of them at the same time. Point stagger delay. I'm not entirely sure what that is. Travel speed 4,000, so that's probably going to be 4,000 meters a second. Assuming Sins is based on meters, as Sins seems to use an arbitrary distance measuring, which is why some of the ships don't look their real size, because people have said this about Atlantis, how it should be bigger and this sort of thing because of it's so huge, and like the Orion next to it is almost the same size. But if you compare the Atlantis to the planet that it's next to, it is already technically about 4 times the size of the original Atlantis. So Sins has this weird distance measurement. Duration, in this case, no duration, because they fire a physical round, a slug round, and they fire 6 of each round. So it's not needed for a duration. Duration is mainly there for a beam. Fire constraint type can always fire. So sometimes it can only fire in one direction, etc. Weapon effects. Weapon type, projectile. So it's a slug round. We fire 6 of those. There is a 0.5 second delay between each round firing. So it doesn't just fire all 6 at once, because that would be very bizarre. There's no delay between the ship being told to fire and it actually firing. We're now on to the actual effects. So this is particle and sound effects. Muzzle effect name, weapon tech capital laser muzzle. So this is when the ship fires, the muzzle flash that you see is of currently the tech capital laser firing. Eventually this will be changed to BC-304 railgun firing, or weapon towery, probably weapon towery railgun muzzle. But at the moment we are still working on those sorts of things. Now, muzzle sound effect min respawn time. So every 0.5 seconds the sound effect, which is down here, will respawn. Weapon tech capital autocannon heavy _ muzzle. So these are the sounds specifically for this, for the weapon tech capital laser muzzle. These 3 sounds are specifically in there for this type of muzzle effect. And obviously, just like the strings, sound count 3. If you had sound count 1, these 2 would get cut off, and it's also quite possible that it would screw with the entire file. and then it would class all of this below that as null and void. Just typing. Hit effect name. Now this is the effect of this weapon, or in this case, this weapon hitting shields, hull plating, that sort of thing. Normally hull, as we can see here, hit hull effect sounds. So this is the weapon impact, physical heavy hit hull. So this is the sound effect for the rounds impacting on hull plating, not shields. Then below that we have shields. Once again, 1. If you don't have it, it goes a bit funky. We have a term in Sims modding called because sins. Because sins does what it wants, and we just have to get on with it. So obviously shields as well. Projectile travel effect is the noise that it makes when it travels. So it could be a or it could be a woo. That's the sound that it's making while it's travelling from where it's been fired to the target. Then moving on, we have another weapon, in this case the missiles. So it targets capital ships, it affects shields and hulls, it's backloaded, it's a slug, and it's the weapon class of missiles. And once again, we have numbers that don't add up to the numbers that, well, they don't link up to the numbers that are that you see in the game. But once again, these are the actual damage outputs, not the average. Now these have a longer range than obviously the, as you can see up here, they have a slightly longer range. We'll say 500 meters longer range than the railguns. They take 10 seconds before they can fire again. They can't fire at fighters. They don't have to synchronize their targets, so they can fire in multiple directions at once. They are much slower traveling than the railguns. They don't have a duration because they're not a beam weapon. They can always fire. It fires 3 missiles at once with a 0.5 second delay between missiles being launched. And obviously we are back down to the sound. You've got the muzzle particles, the sounds, the muzzle and the particle, and the sounds. So it's all here. Now we're on to what we are calling Asgard beam weapons. However, these are just basic beams, energy beams from inside the Sins engine. They do 1250 damage. Now, once again, this is not the number that you see in Sins. They have a longer range than the missiles and railguns. They take 10 seconds to fire. They can't target fighters. They don't have to synchronize. Point stagger delay is a number, but I'm not sure what it does. They fire for 1.8 seconds, so you can see it's a beam weapon, and that duration has come into effect now. The fire constraint type, whereas these ones can always fire, this one is research. And then we've got research prerequisite, number of research prerequisites 1, subject, human research ability Asgard beams. So this beam weapon will not fire until the entity file that controls the Asgard beams research ability has been activated and completed. Obviously, only needs 1 level of that. Required faction name ID, not required. And the weapon effects. Now that this is in there to just tell Sins that it can't fire until this research has been completed. But technically they're always there. They just are unable to fire in Sins until we've completed this research. The weapon effect is beam. It fires once. It doesn't need a burst delay because it's only firing 1. There's no fire delay. And then obviously we are on to the sounds and the effects. So here we have the effect name, which is our psi beam, which is what we use. It takes 1.3 seconds to respawn the sound effect. The sounds are weapon Asgard beam's muzzle. The hit effect name is hitting on hull, but as we don't have those sounds in place, these should all be 0 theoretically, but because we have a sound, the sound count is 1, but there's nothing in here. Now you want to do this if you want to keep it blank, because hitting the hull sound effect, Sins must always have at least one sound in each of these, or it won't work. However, if you want to keep it quiet and empty, you simply remove what's in the speech marks and do it like that, because this is what dictates the amount of sounds there are. And this is what dictates what the sound is. So if you were to remove that, Sins would have a fit. But if it's still there, it doesn't have to have a sound in, as long as it registers that there is a sound there. The sound code is there. There's just nothing in there at the moment. And obviously, because it's a beam, we have beam texture name. So this is the beam. The core of the beam, because this is the glow, so the glow around the actual beam, and this is the core texture of it. The beam width, in this case, well, I'm going to assume that's 20 meters, but it could be something else. And then the color. Now the color is done in its hex color, I think it's called hex color, and it gives it the F format. And beam tiling rate is 3. I'm not sure what that's for. And now weapon index for range is 0. Firing alignment type is default. Target count per bank, so it can only fire at one target from each bank. Can only target structures. If you want a super weapon that targets only the buildings, this is what you want. Just true. Has weapon levels. False, because only Titans have weapon levels, which is where you upgrade the ship itself to have better weapons or better shields rather than using a research. The mass is, I'm gonna say 4,000 tons, but Sins does what it wants. The shields are custom textures that we have put in. Well, they're not textures, they're sort of particles, sort of meshes. They're, it's complicated. I leave that one to Dot. This is the name of it, and this is the file that it's linked to. Render the shields, true. So you can have it as false, so the weapons impact just short of the hull, but you don't see the effect on the shield. And then you've got the acceleration, so 100 meters per second acceleration, I'm gonna say. Could be right, could be wrong. Sins does what it wants. Strafing, so left and right. Linear is deceleration, so that's forward and backwards. How quickly can it stop? I got a bloody delivery of my Battlestar Galactica Blu-ray box set that I've been waiting for 2 months. Yay! Worst time, of course. Where was I? Max acceleration is forward and backwards. How quickly it can do that? I want to say 100 meters per second. Don't really know. It's an arbitrary unit of measurement. Strafing, left and right. Linear deceleration, so stopping. Max acceleration on angular. Angular. I live in Anglia. I don't live in Angular. So, how much can it accelerate? to the left or right, so diagonally, basically. Can it accelerate diagonally as fast as it can just straight forward and turning? Max speed linear, so the maximum it reaches is 500 meters per second, I suppose. So within 5 seconds of it accelerating straight ahead, it will reach its max speed. And max roll rate is how far it will turn. The ship will roll itself in order to turn to travel in a certain distance. And obviously max roll angle, 45 degrees. So how quickly it turns and the maximum that it'll turn to. And then we've got, because this has carrier capabilities, we've got the F-302 Squadron here, and they don't cost antimatter, and the Human Fighter Squadron F-312, which is the heavy version. Number of command points, so how many fighters can it summon, in this case 2. And then we're on to the sounds, so number of sounds, attack ordered, blah 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 blah, and phase, jump, currently still tech heavy, need to get those done. And then we're on to what actually makes the ship look like the ship, which is the mesh info. So the mesh name is Human Cruiser BC-304, and if we go into our mesh file, meshes, and look for human underscore cruiser heavy BC-304. There we go. There's the .mesh file that links into this to make it look like this. But that's just the shape. And then obviously you've got things like exhaust particle systems, exhaust frigate tech heavy, so that makes the engines glow. This hasn't been done custom as of yet, but it will be on our list to do. Hyperspace charge up and travel are sound IDs, so the actual sound it makes when it's charging up its hyperdrive and when it jumps into hyperdrive and is traveling through hyperspace, rather than the, well, when you jump to hyperspace and they say things like prepare for phase jump, that's this file. This sound file is the one that dictates that. This is the sound file it makes when it's going. That's that sound file. And then obviously the engine sound ID, which will hopefully, if I can find a decent source, will be made into the Daedalus sound file. And then you've got its ability slots. What abilities it has? It has in total 5 ability slots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now this 5th one isn't used on capital ships because they have levels, so you click that and it opens up levels so they can upgrade to have Asgard beam weapons and such. However, if you put something on ability 4 slot, which is this one, in developer mode the game has a little bit of a fit because you're not supposed to use that one. So as we can see here, ability 1, mini nuke, which is that one, which is obviously separate entity file to give it its picture and its attributes. So nuke and so on and so forth. Battle systems, which is there, again separate entity file, and same with Asgard Pulse. Max antimatter, as you can see, 150, 150. And that replenishes at 1 antimatter a second. Cargo type invalid because you can have trade cargo or refinery cargo. Max capacity 0. Formation rank is for squadrons of ships, and as we only build 1, it's not required. The shadow is, I believe the shadow is how much of a shadow it casts on other ships, but I'm unsure on that. And then allegiance decrease per round trip. So if that was, for example, 50, if you jumped to another system and then back to Earth, this would become 50% more likely to rebel. So that is the BC304. This is a base template, I would say, for the sins entity files. And why would I say that? Don't save, because otherwise I'll just screw things up. Because this is the frigate from this is the Sabre from Star Trek Armada 3. This means nothing. 3 lines of code. It means absolutely nothing to us. But to sins, it makes perfect sense. And as a result, if I look, this is a 3 kilobyte file, this is an 8 kilobyte file. This may still say .entity, just like the BC304. However, it's been binned, and what that means is it's been transferred into binary. So it obviously makes the file size much smaller, but sins can read every single thing that we put in this slot. And I can prove this because I've got the converted file up here, and here we are. Pretty much, obviously a more complete and up-to-date version and in full version, but pretty much an identical layout. So you see, can bomb, false, type count, 1, frigate roll, light frigate, the icon, so on, how much it costs, experience for destroying, its maximum hull and shield and such, what prerequisites it has, if any, the amount of debris, then weapons. This is a basic layout. And even, here we go, this is an entity file from the Sins game itself. This is for the Tech Scout. This is the Tech Scout in the game, in the base game, no mods. So this is the base template for all of your ship entity files. As you can see, it's all there. This is the base template. But obviously, the Tech Scout doesn't look like this. No. Let's go and have a look at what the Tech Scout looks like, shall we? Tech. Working on it. There's thousands of files in here. Having a look at what the Tech Scout actually looks like will certainly help make things a little bit clearer, because the Tech Scout does not look like the file I just showed you. This is not the Tech Scout. Wait, I know how I can do this much easier. There it is. And then, oh no, because that's the converted file. Never mind. Basically, you will go into your Sins of a Solar Empire Rebellion file. In my case, it's in Steam Library. Same place you get the Sins dev, and you will find, not in a folder called Convert Data, because I made this, Convert Data _ rebellion.exe. Now you run this, and nothing happens. However, these are both the same. However, if I run this command batch file, it crashes, which is fine, it's crashed. However, ta-da, they all look, apart from that one maybe, they look like that original Sabre entity, because this has been changed into binary format. Now, you can look through all of this if you want, but this means nothing to us as coders. So this is capital laser muzzle. That's the sound effect, or the particle, right? Weapon capital muzzle. I can link that to a file. That's a file that makes sense to me, the weapon tech capital laser light muzzle. But the rest of this, I don't know how I can implement this as a file, as a ship. but sins does. And so you get this base format, and then you convert it into this, which makes the file much smaller, but sins still understands it as if it's written like this. This is for us to read and edit, and this is for sins to read and make happen. Now, for this, you're going to need the convert data underscore rebellion.exe and these two files. Now, the convert link, no, ignore that, because that's got to go. These two you can get from a download which just allows things, for example, this to become this, and vice versa. Meaning you can then bring these files in, edit them how you want them, then make them smaller so that sins can understand them and your mod is not taking up so much space. I mean, let me try and find the Frigate Scout entity. If I just copy that name, go back to Sins of Solar Empire, game info, search. And you may have seen the Galaxy Forge and the Particle Forge. We will go over those in more depth later on, because this video has been ridiculously long as it is, because of interruptions and such. And I think my voice will die if I do any more. So let's let it search. And this, if you're using Windows 10 or I believe Windows 8 and probably Windows 7, this search bar, when you get more than 1,000 files in here, is going to be your saving grace. There it is. And this is the entity file straight out of game info. And it looks like a bin file. But obviously I took that and I converted it using that, and now it makes sense to me. But that's not to say that this doesn't make sense. This makes sense to sins. Means bugger all to me, but it makes sense to sins. Now there will be a link in the description that will allow you to download these two, which will make things a little bit easier, and you can obviously have a play around.